Hi, Aaron. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am really happy to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Andy.
All right, so let's start by introducing ourselves so people get to know you a little bit more.
Yeah, I'm Aaron Makelky. I am a career educator who spent 16 years in the classroom teaching secondary social studies in rural states in the US. And I've always been kind of a ed tech enthusiast, AI person lately, and am more into the developer relations and community world now using AI and kind of teaching people how to build with it is what I do now.
One of the things that I love about your profile is that you say that you're an AI enthusiast now, but in the past, you have always been maybe passionate about technology, right? You have always liked technology, but do you have a technology background?
No, just my degrees are in social studies education and educational leadership. It's all education.
All right. So that is actually really an interesting point because most of our guests usually do not have a background in tech, me included. So this is actually really interesting because every time that we're talking about successful cases in school, usually, especially now that we're talking about AI and how AI has been integrated into schools and environments, it's really interesting how usually is the IT team or somebody that already has a background in tech. But now we are catching up. And I would like to know what were the challenges that you had at the very beginning, because I know that you're an early adopter. So I would really like to know a little bit more about your journey.
Yeah, it started with a student in November of 2022 showed me a TikTok video of this new thing called ChatGPT, and they kind of shoved it in my face and said, "Hey, you're into technology. Have you seen this before?" And my answer was no, I hadn't, and I wasn't on TikTok back then. And I went home that night after school and signed up with a Google account and started playing with it. And I did not understand what it was or how it worked, but I knew it was going to change how we teach and how students learn. I just didn't know how. And basically just went on a mission from there the next semester. So January of 2023, I did all of my own assignments that I assigned students. So writing essays, quizzes, projects with ChatGPT. And at first, it was terrible. And I was like, this is not replacing me anytime soon. And then I realized I wasn't good at using it. It wasn't the tool, it was the user. And eventually, my students were like begging me to show them what that was and how I was doing this stuff. And decided I can't keep that to myself. I have to teach them. Here's how I would use it if I was in my own class, because I did all my own assignments with it.
So basically, your exploration with artificial intelligence was empirical. It started very organically, and then did you took any formal training of any sort, or it's all done by you and your instinct?
Yeah, nothing formal. I don't know what formal training existed, especially for educators, but I think what most people have experienced is there's two different ways institutions went early on. Either you have to do it secretly and experiment on your personal accounts and outside of work because your organization doesn't support that sort of stuff. Or in my case, they didn't really know what it was and they didn't care. They'll, do whatever you want. And I was just trying to find a way that I knew was low stakes. What are they going to say? I wrote my own assignment that I gave a student with ChatGPT. How would I get in trouble? Why would anybody care? And it was my own IP, my own assignment that I had written. So no one could get mad at me for uploading that to an AI model because it was my own work. And I just thought that's a low risk way to experiment and I'm not going to get in trouble and my organization didn't really care.
So, of course, we're talking about the beginning of 2023. So, this is a long time ago in AI years, because, of course, I know that this is actually a really funny theory because a lot of people talk about dog years. I like to talk about AI years because for me, every month feels full entire year of how AI evolves. So, going back to the beginning of your journey for me is actually really interesting. What got you to explore AI? Like, what were the problems that you had at school as an educator? And now that you are also part of the group of leaders in your schools that implemented successfully AI, fast forward now in 2024-25, right? So I would like to know, what were the problems that you wanted to solve that got you to explore more deeply into it?
One of my fundamental beliefs about AI is it's a friction remover. The real question is, what friction should you be removing and what friction should you be intentionally saving for you or your students to have to manage on their own? And I have a huge advantage as a history teacher who went through the Google, Wikipedia, one-to-one device era. When I started teaching, it was textbooks, notes, paper, pencil. And so much of the friction was around just access to basic information. I watched what Google, Wikipedia, and a laptop in my students' hands did to that friction. And I was one of the history teachers who decided, well, memorizing stuff should not be the point. It is inherently part of the learning process, but it shouldn't be the end only product you leave with. And having gone through that paradigm shift, I just saw AI as the next version. It's a personalized Wikipedia that can do other things too. And then going, okay, well, what stuff still matters in the classroom and what stuff can I automate for me as the instructor or for them as the learner? So for example, I know you're a big Notebook LM user. My students all had Google Apps for Education accounts. None of them knew they had Notebook LM. And you should have your own study guide curated how you want it. If you want the audio summary, make yours. If you want the video summary, do that. But maybe the project and the experiential learning and what you do with that information can now become the focus because we can remove friction from studying, recalling facts, and access to information.
So what I'm hearing from your end is that you were sort of initiating a tiny revolution in your classroom when it came to students adventuring themselves into learning in a much more autonomous way, right?
Absolutely. So I'll give you another specific example.
Okay.
Writing in the secondary social studies class is a huge focus. And traditionally, you could either go to a tutor center or do a writing workshop in your classroom, and it's very time and resource intensive. There's only one of me, there's 30 kids trying to get help on their essay. And I thought, well, if I can write clear enough instructions for a custom GPT while my students wait or before they turn in essays, why wouldn't I have them do a writing workshop with that asynchronously whenever they wanted? So it could be at 2 a.m. on their phone. I don't care because now I don't have to personally do that. And that removes friction from the feedback process, getting ideas, brainstorming, helping them write on grade level. And then you go, well, so what do we do? Because that essay used to take us 90 minutes to write in class, and now my student can do it better in 10 or 15 minutes. And I think that's one of the things that scares educators is, well, then what else do we do? Because that's always been the focus.
Right. But that is actually what makes this so interesting because I do personally believe that artificial intelligence highlights all the gaps that were there that perhaps a lot of us didn't want to address. I'm talking not only about the educators, I'm talking about the administration, I'm talking about everybody that it's involved, right? But since we're talking about our own micro ecosystem, which is the classroom, when you wanted to open the spectrum and take it a little bit further and involve your colleagues, and because I know that you're this super positive force in your school, that yeah, I see you in that way. I mean, I'm a super big fan of your talks. I've learned myself personally from them. I use it as examples too, sometimes in my classroom. So I think that you are a very positive example of how this educator can be this huge force of change, right, for the others. Now, the conversations probably were never easy. So I would like to know, how did you started these conversations with your school and your administration? Because that is sometimes the most frictional part.
Yeah, I probably took what's an unorthodox approach. You can tell me because you have interviewed other people. I didn't go to them and I didn't ask for the microphone. I didn't ask for a training. I just went out to the internet and algorithms and thought, I'll put my ideas and my examples out there. So LinkedIn, TikTok, YouTube, kind of everywhere and just see what sticks and what's good. Maybe I have no idea what I'm talking about and this is terrible. Or maybe I'm light years behind the best people in education. I didn't really know. And instead of trying to push my organization to let me get in front of people, I just put it out everywhere but there and waited for them to come to me. And honestly, I didn't it wasn't my goal to say, "Oh, I hope they let me train my own colleagues," because I got to do trainings with people around the world and in some different verticals besides education. But I think what happened is after seeing me do other things and maybe going, why wouldn't we do that here? He's down the hall. I just let them come to me and they asked, hey, could you do some training? Could you help develop some stuff and present at a series of staff meetings? And I just said, sure. I mean, I was pretty indifferent. I don't know if that's the best strategy because I don't think most people want to put themselves out there. But instead of targeting my colleagues, I just put it everywhere else on social media to see how it went and kind of built relationships through that. I mean, that's how I met you. We call it ESL, English as a Second Language. 2 teachers in my school do that job. You are always the first Instagram account I share, and I've shared your stuff with my language learning students that I've had in class. Because, and especially in rural America, we don't have experts on all of that stuff. We barely have enough people, let alone experts who share and make videos and collaborate with other people. You and I do.
Well, that I think that is so interesting, especially because I love the strategy, by the way, because you let the work speak for itself. And I do know that that was a little bit tricky because they could have asked you or not. But again, what I love is that that was perhaps never really your intention. So you would just wanted to go out there and keep on experimenting and keep on your journey as a teacher. And I absolutely love that because while you were learning, and that's what I love about your experience is that you were implementing it and sharing it with others out there. One of the things that, for example, I'm always curious to learn from other educators like you and schools that have implemented artificial intelligence is how did you decide which AI tools stay and which ones are the ones that we discard? This it's not only that I want to know which ones you are keeping to work in your school, but also to help other teachers out there if they're starting their journey. How can we give them this advice? Okay, guys, these are the ones that we're keeping for these reasons.
It's a great question. I have always had the opinion of the fundamentals and the way of using the tool is more important than the tool because the tool will change. A huge struggle for educators is the IT staff blocks, doesn't allow, takes 6 months to open a site that you want, and it's really just out of our control. What I have done is say you probably already have access to some. Just start with those, especially if you're already paying for them. So an example, with my school this school year, no one knew that they had access to Gemini because Google baked it in and said, you guys have Google Apps for Ed, Gmail, Google Classroom. Gemini was just an add-on, but nobody knew. There was no memo sent out saying, hey, you have this tool and it's open on our networks, including for students. And people love to ask me, well, what's the best model and what's the best app? And I go, just use the one that you have and get good at it. And until you find things that it can't handle, why are you looking for something else, especially if it's going to cost you money? So in my classes this fall, everything I've done with students, I let them pick, but I default to Gemini because they have it and it's already paid for. And I know the network is not going to block it. That doesn't mean Gemini is the best. It just means it's the most accessible, so we don't have to waste time and resources evaluating tools and getting bids and finding the budget. Just use what you have because most people have either Copilot or Gemini because they're a Microsoft school or a Google school. There are, of course, other things that are great too, but I think just to get started, you already have something that you're paying for and you have access to, so start with that.
I love that. I honestly believe that your advice is one of the most practical and realistic because again, we are fighting, and I say fighting because sometimes it's a struggle. We're fighting against the system, the school staff, the trainings or no trainings, the parents, and all that, right? So I love that you're saying that use what you have. That is an awesome takeaway, and get really good at it. And quite honestly, I do believe that Gemini is one of those gifts that keep on giving, because it is always sort of reinventing, and specifically in your case, I'm a little bit jealous about that. You're in the US and you can get access to the labs, which, for example, me being based in Europe, I can't. Boo. That is,
GDPR, dang it.
I know. But again, there are a lot of constraints there. And so that is really good. So whatever you are geographically, just try to see which are the best options for your own reality, right? Now, one of the challenges that I also think that it's interesting based on what you're talking is, what is it in terms of AI adoptions? How did AI adoption affected your school culture or mindset, if that was a thing?
Do I have permission to speak freely on this question, Andy?
Well, of course, absolutely, because especially because in this case, what I want for those that are going to watch this video and are going to listen to the podcast later on, I want them to find something that maybe they can recycle for their own reality and start from there. So please.
Yeah. Well, it's divisive, I'll say that. I'm also in the most rural state, so I might be in the, but we're not a very progressive, tech forward, or even culturally forward place.
Yeah.
But what I see is it comes down to fear. And I told my students this just a week or two ago. I completely understand the frustrations of your teachers who want to ban AI. It comes from a place of wanting you to do your own thinking and you to do the work and you to learn. I want the same thing for you. Where I disagree with many is the solution. So the problem, I think all of us agree, the world has changed. Now, how do we have to change in classrooms? And there's a faction in every faculty and anywhere you teach, there's going to be people this way that say, ban it, block it, you will write paper, pencil, you will not have a device, I'll block the Wi-Fi, whatever they're trying to do. My challenge to those people is, are you truly serving the students for the future that they are going into? Or are you trying to prepare them for 1988 when you went to college? Because the world that kids go into when they leave our institutions is almost unrecognizable. But school doesn't look that different. I mean, we're mostly using Chromebooks and laptops to do digital worksheets. It's a screen version of what we did in textbooks when I was in school in the 90s. The problem is that's not the world that kids are going to go into. And I don't know any boss who's going to say, you're going to write these reports paper pencil, so I know you don't use Gemini or GPT. They're going to say, if you use AI, use it responsibly, and you're going to ensure that it's high quality content before you turn in your report. I don't care what tool you use. That's every job in America besides in a classroom. So you have to be prepared for that faction. And I remind myself, it's not about who's smarter or who the kids or anything like that. It's just, I'm afraid of them going into the world writing paper pencil essays and being completely unprepared for their future, more than I'm afraid to change my practice as a teacher. I would rather change how I teach writing and assess it than push them into the world with 1960s level tech skills and mindsets. There will be teachers who disagree. And a lot of what I see is administration is saying, okay, if you want to go out and explore these things and implement, here are the boundaries, but no one has to. There are very few schools or districts in the United States that I've seen or worked with that are saying, you will use Gemini, you will use GPT. However, they're starting to say, you need a policy for it, you need to be consistent with it, and you need to find ways to build it in. So to me, it's, you just have to remind yourself there's the fear factor, and it's a human thing that's innate in our brains. We fear the unknown. So what do I do if they have ChatGPT and they don't need me to spit out facts as a history teacher? That's fair, but I think you have to be willing to go do the work of figuring out, if we remove that friction from my classroom, then what is my role? And I think it's to do greater, higher, better things, not I'll just sit at my desk and let you use AI the whole time.
Especially because I agree to this specific point about, yeah, just let's use AI for the sake of it, right? I actually do believe that this is a very dangerous approach if we have educators or schools that try to integrate AI in a way that it's let's just use it for the sake of it. I really feel that it's very interesting that you are mentioning the different states and how different it is that within the same country, there are so many different opinions. And I think that this is actually helpful for those educators out there that are starting or haven't even started yet to work on deeply AI because their own realities as a school, as an educator, etc. I think that this is actually really important because, well, there are always some limitations, right? Let's call it that. But it is also true that for those educators that are doing training on their own, and they are investing in their futures because they want to help and they want to serve the students, as you say, they do encounter many ethical and governance dilemmas. So, would you like to mention the ones that actually don't let you sleep at night? The ones, maybe mention three or a couple that these for me are the most important.
Well, first, I would say this. If you're in a location physically, so a country or even a state in the US where there aren't people down the hall or across town that are in this world, that is the power of the internet. That's how I met you. That's how I learned from great people in this world because there aren't many in my zip code. It's just a rural place and a lot of people aren't into this stuff. So go out on the internet and you can find those sources. In terms of dilemmas, I think one of the biggest ones is the lack of understanding around what goes into a large language model in terms of training data. And people are used to an email mindset. So we've all seen these signatures in emails that say, if you receive this as a mistake, please hit delete if it's not intended for you. And they think all data you can just go, oh, yeah, that was a mistake, delete, and it's gone. The problem with large language models, and I know you know this, but we're talking to the average teacher or the student who's just starting to use stuff. They're using a free version of ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, Perplexity, whatever model, and all of them default on training the model on your data. And what they don't understand is, let's take a special educator in the United States who is writing an IEP. Very sensitive document, has lots of personally identifiable information. They go, well, I was on ChatGPT at home on my own device, and I copied and pasted all this sensitive data in, but it's not on the school network and my boss would never know. And my question is, well, how can you get that back out? Once it's gone in and you're on the free version and allowing them to train the model on your data, you can't. You can't go to OpenAI headquarters and grab a server and unplug stuff and say, you don't get that data anymore. Once it's there, it's gone. And you agreed to that when you signed up. And I think a lot of people just don't understand because it's a new thing in technology that you can't hit the unsend button in iMessage. You can't delete it in email if you made a mistake. So just paying attention to what's happening to my data before I put it in. A great example is a lot of my students were using ChatGPT on their phone in a browser, not logged in. They don't even have the app on their phone. And I told them, I get why you're doing that. It's low friction, but understand you have the least privacy protection possible when you do that, and you have no control over your data. And I know you're putting in names, dates, your own ideas, and there's no way to get that out. So I think just understanding where your data goes and what those labs can do with it is the most important one.
All right. Basically, what I hear you saying is people get your AI literacy fundamentals straight and right now because it is absolutely necessary. And I think that being a kid from the 90s, I think that is actually really important that because we were the first ones that grew up with the internet. I mean, we actually experimented everything that went on with that first technological wave. And there were so many crazy things going on. And I do believe that because that first digital wave was so crazy. And I think that right now it's impossible for us to live without the internet, right? So I can only imagine, since now that we've got generative AI, all the things that our kids are going to go through. Now, the conversations, of course, with the parents, it's always a little bit complicated because, again, they should be aware of basically the usage of the tools that our kids are using in the classroom. So how is that conversation happening? I know that right now you have been going through all this since the end of 2022. So it's been a good practice for a couple of good solid years now. So how have you been through those conversations and how did you evolve in those conversations?
Yeah, that's a very underrated topic. So I'm glad we're bringing that up. At first, I didn't have any because I didn't know how to have them. And then I realized I have to put something in the syllabus. I have to address it at the back to school night parent teacher conferences. Depending on where in the world you teach, there's some sort of interfacing with parents if you're K-12. And I just started putting things in the syllabus and said, as an expectation, your students will use technology. They never have to use it. So I put in an opt-out clause, and I encourage everyone to do this because if you haven't had a student who refuses to use generative AI, you will. Because I'm in probably one of the most isolated places in the lower 48 that's not into tech and it's not trendy. I have had 3 students in the last 2 semesters that said, I refuse to use it. My answer is great. You can opt out and you can do the same assignment in a different format and turn it into the same place. And I use this analogy in the US, at least, when a parent or a student objects to the content of an assigned book. They can say, based on our values or whatever reason, we want an alternate assignment. And you can't make them read this novel. Well, what happens when a student says, I don't want to use AI to help review my essay? That's fine. I expect it written on this level. Here's the rubric. You don't get a lower standard. You're just choosing to use a different tool to do it. So the other analogy I'd use is say you're going to build a house and I'm going to teach you how to use power tools and you object to electricity. Get out a hammer and a handsaw, but I still expect the house to be built to the same spec and just the same level of quality as the person using the power tool, but I'm not going to make you use the power tool. And putting that in your syllabus and then directly addressing that with kids, because it's always awkward. And while I disagree with the ones who opt out, that's their choice. And I'll tell them at the beginning, every assignment, I'll say, this is the level of AI you can use if you choose to. If you choose to do this manually on your own, that is totally your choice. You just don't have to put an AI use disclaimer and a link to chats because you didn't use any. And you just have to build a culture on that so that parents understand your kid might come home and talk about what we did, but I'm not forcing it on them. I'm not requiring it. Because what would you do with the student in your class who said, I refuse to use generative AI? I mean, are you going to grab the keyboard and put their hands on it and say, open ChatGPT and prompt it now? You can't do that. So you have to have a way. So I would encourage everybody to think about if you haven't had that experience, you will have a student who will tell you that I refuse to use it. How would you address it if they were objecting to the content of an assigned chapter or novel or video you were going to show? You wouldn't hold their eyelids open and make them watch the film. You'd say, you can go in the hall or on your own do this other assignment that shows the same learning. So put it in your syllabus, build a culture around it, make it normal to talk about, and then protect the kids if they're the one in class. So say you have 25 kids and one always says, I don't want to use it. Don't let anybody make them feel lesser for it and don't lecture them. I tell them, I'm not here to proselytize this stuff. I'm just here to prepare you for your future. I'm telling you your future is AI rich. You may not know that. I do. But if you disagree, that's fine. You can do it on paper, pencil, take a picture and upload it to the LMS. That doesn't hurt my feelings.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that what is important. We are also protecting their own choices, right? Now, in this case, since you're talking about all the things that you're doing in the classroom, and I have been following you for a while now, over a year, I would like to know which has been the most successful case scenarios. Maybe you can mention the one because maybe it's a huge project that you have been developing, or maybe a couple of projects that you have been developing in your school or with your school that you know was a success in terms of the AI integration?
Yeah, so let's do a specific example with one student. If you have students with learning disabilities, second language learners, exceptionalities, anything in that category, and you are not teaching them how to use AI to learn in their own unique way, you are doing your students a disservice. So, for example, a high school social studies class, I'm assigning readings that are on a college level. We expect kids to read and write on an upper high school level, but the average student is really 6th to 8th grade. And I have students that come in with IEPs that read and write on a 3rd grade level. That's not uncommon. I've had multiple of those a year. But we're giving them college level texts going, good luck. What are they supposed to do with that? I had a student who was one of the hardest working, most motivated learners I've ever taught, but read on a 3rd grade level. And I just taught him how to use ChatGPT, and he made his own little project folder that knew what level he liked to read on and what analogies he liked things explained in. So he loved to work out, he loved the outdoors, hunting, fishing, and he loved trucks. His GPT could take any speech from a 19th century German chancellor and spit it out on a level that he actually understood, using analogies that connected with him personally to understand and engage with the content. And here's the best part. He does it in the back row with his keyboard and doesn't need me. And that student came to me and he's like, I feel I can read and I can access people, and it's a step stool that just instantly put me up. Once I learned how to prompt and build this system, it just leveled the playing field with all of my peers who can read and write on a college level, but I'm on a 3rd grade level. That was such a huge one that I left that class after having him for a semester and thought every kid with an IEP needs to have access to this stuff. In terms of a bigger picture one, I'll give you a really simple open-ended one that anyone can do in any content area or grade level. I started saying, here's the assignment we've always done. So let's say reading, constructed response paragraph. Now take Gemini Canvas mode and build something that shows me what you learned about it. And at first, kids will say, what is Canvas mode? I don't know what this is. And I would tell them, I'm not going to grade you on the end product. I'm going to grade you on the process that I see in your chat log. And pretty soon I had kids building Oregon Trail style decision making games or coding a website that displayed all of this stuff. And they realized they have this tool and all they're doing is writing essays and taking multiple choice quizzes. But now they've seen what Canvas mode can do. And they're, why do we only write essays? We should do more of this. And pretty soon I had one code a game that I had to complete as the instructor that went through these different historical events as if I was the leader. And then it would tell me if I was right or wrong based on my decision making. And he made me play the game that he coded to see that he knew the content. And I never would have thought of that, but giving your kids a creative medium, just a blank canvas and say, go experiment for a day with it, you will be surprised at what they come up with.
I love it, especially because one of my specific takes away that I am listening from this part of your answer is give the kids a chance, a real chance, so they can develop in their own time and era and not in the way that we thought it actually worked for us because they're living in a very different world than the one that we did. Yeah? Did I got you right?
Absolutely. And every school that I've seen has some sort of a motto above the doors that says, preparing all students for their futures or preparing all students for their next steps. And the question I ask all the time to my students and colleagues is the paper pencil essay preparing them for their next steps? Or is it making your life easier and safe? Because those are not the same thing in 2025.
Ouch. That is a good one. Is sort of like, I'll just want to put it out there. Okay, so since you mentioned the colleagues, okay, so before we go, what's your plan, if there is a plan, for sustaining or scaling this beyond sort of the pilot stage? Because I do believe that we're still in the pilot stage, right? There's still so much for us to learn and implement and do. So what's your plan, yours and your school?
Well, there's what I think and then what will actually happen. But what I think is every institution has what one of my friends calls AI scouts. So you are an AI scout. I am too. We play with things, we try stuff, we experiment, and we're a little bit ahead of the curve in terms of adoption. If you don't have AI scouts in your school, then you are one because you're listening to this and you're interested in this topic. So, congratulations, you're the AI scout for your department or your institution. What you need to do is say during the pilot stage, I'll go through the messy experimentation and mistake laden phase of just figuring this stuff out. And then what your institution needs to do is put you in front of everybody else who hasn't gone through that and is not an AI scout. They don't know about the new model release or how LLMs really work. They think it's just for cheating or whatever. And harness the learning and the mistakes made by your scouts already as a shortcut for everybody else who's 3, 5, 10 steps behind them. And just empower that person to bring them along and say, it took me 2 years to get here, but I can get you even with me in a semester easily. And if you don't have that person, you can find one. Go on the internet, follow your Instagram account, or find some good people on LinkedIn. There's lots of them talking about what they do, but you probably already have one. And to get from the scout stage to scaling it up, it takes leadership, inherently human skills, and difficult conversations to challenge people to use stuff. And for every objection you hear, so let's say you're a school leader, you have a staff member who refuses or doesn't want to adopt a thing or whatever, take a list of all of their objections. You don't have to know the answer. Go to your scouts and say, what do we say to this? How do we overcome this problem? Because they'll know. And then you have to have the courage to say, this is how it's going to be. We're going to open these tools. We're going to unblock ChatGPT or Google Gemini or whatever. And then for every one of those objections, you say, well, if you don't know how to teach writing with AI, down the hall is Mrs. Smith, and she is an expert, and you can go have lunch with her anytime you want, or PLC with her, or follow her newsletter she writes, whatever it is. But there's no excuse to bury your head in the sand. And to scale up, it really takes leadership. And ironically, not anything technological, purely human skill of challenging those people who are trying to obstruct or ignore to say, hey, this is what's best for kids. You have experts here that can help you. I'm learning too. Let's do it together. But ignoring it is not an option here.
I love that, especially because I honestly believe that educators and we're very eager to share what we're learning right now because it's spectacular. I mean, I get super excited about it. I go beyond the wow factor. So for me, I do understand each of every word that you're saying because I personally feel it. And if anybody in my school comes and say, hey, Andy, I don't understand this, I'm, oh, have you got some time? Let's sit down and let's do this because I'm really excited to share. And that is, I believe, how it should be. I know that we personally charge for this kind of things, but I mean, we're in the same school, we're colleagues. I really just don't mind. And I love the AI Scouts visual because honestly, if you as a school leader, if you're in the school board already have those, use them. They're there down the hall, as you
Yeah.
say. All right, before we go, would you like to leave us with some pearls of wisdom?
Yeah, I don't know if I have any pearls of wisdom, Andy, but I would say this to your audience is you don't have to know all of the answers. You have to be willing to examine your practice and the way you've done things and admit there might be a better way. I think the fundamental connection between all of these AI scouts, between you and I, we live in different countries, we natively speak different languages, teach different content areas, but here's what we have in common. I can look back at 2 years ago and say, yeah, that's not the best way for students to learn or for me to teach in 2025, given what I know and the tools that we have access to. As long as you're willing to reflect and admit and evolve and grow beyond your own ego, the potential is unlimited and access to the information is so available. 99% of it is free. You just have to be willing to look for it and make those connections with people who can find it. So I love what you do on social media, Skilling Future. I've seen there's this whole group of international educators in my LinkedIn feed that are just saying, We want to take this stuff, I think, especially in an international focus, and make sure people have access to these tools. So there's no excuse to say, I don't know how to use something. I don't know how I would do that. Find someone, follow them, DM them. As long as you're willing to say, hey, maybe there's a better way, then your potential is unlimited.
Thank you, Aaron, for being with us. I loved everything that you've said. I'm really grateful. And for those out there watching this video or listening to this audio, thank you so much. I'll see you in the next one.